Welcome back, Peter. Well, thank you. Nice to be back and welcome yourself. And what is today's topic? Well, I decided it's time to do the wedding sacrifice ritual. I've had it in the back of my mind for a while. I know I've done a few explorations of the Sacrificial King Ritual. I hope my friends have watched that or those lectures. But I always felt there was a second cannibal ritual around wedding ceremonies. And well, to explain, and for those who are not familiar with my work, I have argued with some evidence that the ruling class has been farming humans underground, probably for centuries. And being being who they are, the WCC, they take pleasure in mocking and mentally controlling the minds of their slave cattle. And so they invented a few rituals for their slave cattle, rituals that tricked them into believing they would be, what's the word, glorified, coronated, made into kings. Get the whole slave class excited about that. And during that sacrificial king ritual, probably a twin would replace the slave king who would be executed at the climax of his coronation ritual. Executed, or at least rendered unconscious with a jolt of electricity. And then perhaps 3 days later, the twin would be marched out as evidence that the king resurrected from the dead. Now, the promise of becoming a king is rather tempting, attractive. You can see, we can guess people would get excited about it. And it would be made more persuasive with plenty of pomp. Now, a wedding would rival that, perhaps. Imagine being raised underground with very little social life, probably in gender-separated conditions. Then being told you will marry a prince or princess and live above ground in a palace. You have been chosen, just as the kings were chosen to be executed. Well, that's the origin of the biblical story of the Jews being chosen. So, what is my evidence for the notion, the theory that the WCC practiced wedding sacrifice rituals? Well, let's begin with an examination of one story, two articles that are actually about king sacrifice, and three paintings about the wedding sacrifice ritual, secretly, of course, secretly about them. Secrecy is necessary when you're a cannibal and trying to keep your slave cattle class unaware. Let me share my first story content. The Cinderella story by the brothers Grimm. They were not named, they did not choose the name Grimm by chance. Their stories are very grim. And this one, although generally superficially considered a story with a happy ending, it is not at all on closer inspection. Let's have a look at a few key quotations. The first, the beginning of the story. There once was a rich man whose wife lay sick, and when she felt her end drawing near, she called to her only daughter to come near her bed, and said, "Dear child, be pious and good, and God will always take care of you." Now, we can be blind readers and think, well, this is a lovely and tearful parting message. Or we can be awake and notice the irony in this passage. The woman is sick and dying, and her advice to her child is, be pious and good, and God will always take care of you. Really, like God took care of the mother? Or are we supposed to assume that the mother was dying because she was a sinner? I don't think so. Clearly, God did not take care of the woman, nor will she take care very well, nor will he take care of Cinderella. It makes her life rather miserable for some time before marrying her off to a prince, as if princes are all gentlemen. You know what I mean? It's silly stuff. But there's God. Someone's making fun of God, the author. Well, Cinderella's life does not go so well. She becomes basically a household slave to her stepsisters. They are allowed to go to a princess ball dance party. And, well, the father, on coming back from a trip, brings Cinderella a hazel twig. She asked for the first twig that touched his hat, and, well, it was a hazel twig. Why a hazel twig? She later plants that hazel twig on her mother's grave, and it turns into a large hazel bush. Hazel. First four letters spell the word haze. What is a hazing? What is it? What does that mean, to haze? To subject someone to cruel horseplay, first noted in 1850. To harass with work, punish by keeping at unpleasant and unnecessary labor, dated to 1840, about the time of the Brothers Grimm. But there's a third and fourth, but we'll stop at the third meaning, perhaps from Hawes, meaning terrify, frighten, confound. That's the way it's used, I think, in some university, college societies, and in the military. A hazing is not fun. And could be related to the whole adrenochrome cult, couldn't it? Terrify someone before you execute them. Let's go back. And my next highlights here. Cinderella is asking the hazelnut tree for silver and gold to come down and cover her. Is she naked? Well, she wants a dress for the ball. And that's what she gets. A dress of gold and silver. And a pair of slippers embroidered with gold and silver. Now, this reminds me of paintings depicting kings dressed in armor, full body armor, often. Why is armor also made of metal and a dress here made of silver and gold? Well, you see the similarity. Why is this a feature in weddings and king's dress? It's because metal is, of course, electrically conductive, and as I said, these occult satanic rituals involved electrocution. Not very practical, really, to have a silver and gold dress. Although they did master how to spin gold thread around cloth thread, so who knows how heavy it would be, but it just says gold and silver. That might be a heavy dress. Well, after a first visit at the ball, the prince has already fallen for her, but she runs away at the end and jumps into a pigeon house. How does a young woman fit into a pigeon house? This is a theme for today's study. Small women, small people. I've discussed that in another lecture. And an oil lamp burnt dimly in the chimney. She always has an oil lamp with her, as if there is no light around her, as if she is really underground. Yes, I think everyone underground had to carry a lamp. Next quotation. There stood a fine large tree bearing splendid pears. She leapt as lightly as a squirrel among the branches, and the prince did not know what had become of her. So this is after the second night at the ball. She escapes again, this time into a pear tree. As lightly as a squirrel. What is this woman? Women don't leap as lightly as squirrels. Well, it's another confirmation that she maybe is quite small. Trees to the rescue, always trees. The prince picked it up. Oh yes, he's picking up the slippers, which Cinderella somehow lost during her third escape. Or was it the second? And he sees that, yes, it's made of gold and it's very small and slender. Well, he brings it to the house where she lives, but she's in hiding, or she's stowed away in her workroom. And the stepsisters receive these shoes and are desperate to prove that they are the ladies who danced with the prince, well, one of them, and they can't fit into Cinderella's shoes. Well, we know what happens. Well, at least in the Grimm story, the mother of these stepsisters tells the first girl, to cut her toe off so she can squeeze into the slipper. Really? A mother would advise a daughter to cut her toe off so that she can marry a prince. This is this is repulsive. Who thinks of such storylines and behaviors? What sick people wrote our stories? Not my stories. The second daughter also can't fit into the shoe, and her mother says, well, cut a piece off your heel, which she does, just as her former other sister cut off her toe. Repugnant, ridiculous stories. This is not how our ancestors thought. These are not real oral tradition folk tales, if such a thing even exists. I think it's entirely a invention. People didn't memorize 1,000 words, 10,000 word stories and walk around sharing them with each other. So that's enough of, well, maybe one more point. Obviously, Cinderella is found and married to the prince. And we've looked at the word haze, and from the root of hazel, and pear. A pear tree symbolizes longevity. There's the theme of the adrenochrome addicts who would like to live longer by transfusing the blood of young people into old members of the WCC. Pear tree and the hazelnut tree, both have secondary meanings. I say secondary because, of course, primary meaning of these trees is that they once sustained the lives of our ancestors. And so this story not only is repugnant and secretly about like the cannibal cult, but it is also a story that intentionally erases the history of our ancestors who were dependent on trees, not on fields of crops, but food forests. Lastly, the word ball. Everything revolved around the ball. And what is the root or what is the cryptic reference behind the word ball? I think it's Baal, the fertility god in ancient Middle East, who, however, in the Bible is associated with human and child sacrifice. That's what the ball was secretly about, and that's what Cinderella really wanted to be a part of. Cinderella the sinner. Not so nice, but there you have it. Let's look at a couple of articles about child sacrifice. This is an article about. Please scroll up. Discoveries made in Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, where the Maya people, the imaginary Maya people, reputedly lived. There is a site where 100 skeletal remains were discovered. They belong to children. And DNA obtained, well, I don't really believe in DNA, but whatever they did, they have some reason to believe or some reason to tell us that at least of 64 skeletons, 4 belong to twins, 2 sets, and possibly more. And all these children were between the ages of 3 and 6. Personally, I believe these skeletal remains were brought there from a larger collection in one of Mexico's colonial cities, probably from below one of its many cathedrals, churches, where hidden catacombs are probably still waiting to be discovered, or at least opened to the public. Well, 2 sets of twins in a group of 64 skeletons is still quite high. If that's accurate, it makes me wonder if the WCC was already using fertility drugs. As we know, they can increase the chances of twins. Now, it turns out twins figure prominently in ancient Maya religion and art, and sacrificing twins is described in sacred writings, including a book called Popol Vuh. All this fake stuff, all this garbage produced by the WCC to give us the impression that indigenous peoples were cannibals, while, of course, the colonial powers, they brought Christianity, civilization, technology. Oh, they were so good. Well, I've mentioned the role of twins in the Sacrificial King Ritual. So no more need be said here, except maybe why are these children sacrificial children so young, 3 to 6 years old? Why are they all boys? Well, if you know anything about farming livestock, raising livestock, you don't need many studs, many males. Females are the breeders and producers. So all the extra males are slaughtered at a young age before they become a burden for the human farmers of humans. They can't figure that out, of course, these anthropologists. Why only boys? Ooh, it's discrimination, it's sexism. No, it's farming. It's a practical explanation. Maybe this is the last quote. No, they've just talked about twins. I've already done that. There are no cut marks or evidence of trauma which tells us how they did not die. Very good. They did not die in violent battle. But we have not found a cause of death for them yet, Barquera said. No, and you won't until you at least entertain the idea that we're dealing with a cannibal cult. We're living under a cannibal cult. They did not drive daggers into the chests of their sacrificial children. They did not cut open their chests and remove their hearts. They drained the blood out of them and cooked them whole, sometimes minus feet and hands, as those are not the most meaty parts on the body, are they? A similar article about human sacrifice, this time not in Mesoamerica, but in Mesopotamia. Funny word. Meso, middle pot, the cooking pot. Amia, friend, it's very closely related to the words in various languages for friend, amia. Yeah, my friend in the middle pot. So in Mesopotamia, being a king for a day could be deadly. What ridiculous things they make up. Of course, the stories they give us don't make sense on close inspection, just as lies always fall apart on close inspection. The reality is that before the modern age, all kings were sacrificial kings who were kings for perhaps 5 seconds before they were executed, very soon after their coronation. A few quotations to share and discuss. It is early June in the year later known as 763 BC. No, this is not so long ago. That's imaginary history. You are a prisoner of war in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and you have good reason to be afraid. Not a prisoner of war. You are a prisoner of psychopaths who destroyed your food forests and shoved you underground. Across cultural groups and political dynasties on every continent, eclipses of the sun and moon have long been profound spiritual and cultural events. How do we prove that? With books, with pictures, friezes, and engravings. No actual proof that our ancestors had any interest in the movements of the stars and the planets. None at all. And they weren't. This obsession with the movement of the sun especially is completely based on the WCC's tradition of using sunshine as it pours through a cathedral window or other building window at the exact angle at which it can be magnified with a magnifying glass, a burning glass, so that large pieces of cookware can be heated and the contents cooked. The angle of the sun had to be right. Churches, cathedrals had to be built facing the correct directions. So we rarely get large windows facing north, except for, what are they called? Rose windows, which were not for allowing sunshine through, even before they became filled with stained glass. But I digress. I'll continue. Second sentence of this highlight. The banishment of the sun behind the moon in particular has represented many things, from a demonic dragon devouring the sun in both Inca and Chinese lore. Both Inca and Chinese lore. What are the chances? Oh, yes, it's evidence that the human spirit thinks the same across all cultures. Nonsense. It's evidence that the same highly mobile cult was going around the world writing our myths, scriptures, folklore, and other Baal shit. I continue. In northern Mesopotamia, by the 10th century BC, at the height of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the priests knew that if the planet Jupiter was visible as the eclipse passed overhead, the king was doomed. What nonsense. You know, how often does that happen? Jupiter's visible while there is an eclipse. And then you know the king is doomed. Eh? That would have had to repeat a few times before you could detect a pattern. How many centuries? Anyway, it's silliness. Um, in the Bible, there is one story about an eclipse. It happens during the life of Joshua, and he was alive during the time of Moses, or he was contemporaneous with Moses and Aaron, Moses, his brother Aaron. And Aaron was essentially a king if you look carefully at how he was dressed. He received a crown-like piece of headwear, something like a throne, a chair, and he slowly, or somehow mysteriously, disappeared from the narrative. Possibly, I think it's implied, maybe during the eclipse. The most important such ritual was called Sarpuhi, and I'm guessing Akkadian, the substitute ritual. So this ritual uh, was allegedly invented so that the real king would not die when Jupiter is visible during an eclipse. You know, the people would cleverly replace the real king with a fake king, and the gods would not notice, and the fake king would die. What childish fairy tales they fed us. Yeah, the substitute king would enjoy all the trappings of regency before being ritualistically killed to fulfill the prophecy and keep the gods at bay, I guess. He would be wined and dined, presented with gifts, and according to some accounts, even provided with a virginal queen as his consort. Meanwhile, the real king would continue conducting palace business somewhere safely out of sight. It's ridiculous stories like this that were concocted on the basis of the real story being the sacrificial king ritual done intentionally, not for the gods, but for the cannibal class, for their entertainment, for their food, and for their longevity. They corrupted their own history, turned it into silly stories, and handed them to us, and laughed because we didn't notice that the silly stories don't make much sense. And the silly stories conceal the real stories, the real horror Something grimmer than grim, I guess. Let's look at some paintings. We got three paintings to look at. This is The Execution of Lady Jane Grey by Paul de la Roche, 1834. She's being executed because they decided that she couldn't be the Queen of England. I guess was Mary became queen after her. So Lady Jane Grey was queen for 9 days. Very short reign, isn't that? Well, they can't stop basing these stories on on the reality that kings and queens, sacrificial kings and queens, were executed. Probably the same day they were crowned, probably the same minute. So we have plenty of stories of short-lived reigns and of very young kings and queens too, don't we? Keep that in mind. I mean, there were child kings, not only in England and other places in Europe, but also in China. What are the odds? Who's writing our stories? Yes, the same people at work in different continents. Well, this painting surprised me. It has many, many elements that deserve analysis, that reward analysis. First, most obviously, we should start with Lady Jane Grey, Queen Jane Grey. Where is her regal wear? Where is her prison wear? No, she's dressed in a wedding gown. First, very big clue that this story, this painting, is not about a queen's execution. This is about a bride's execution. A few things to know, a few things that confirm this reading are the chopping block first. Too small. Really, the axe head is larger than the top of this chopping block. The shape is a bit odd, so not very functional. Secondly, the straw strewn around this chopping block presumably was meant to absorb her blood, but this is not sufficient straw to absorb. I don't know how many liters of blood come out of a young woman. And there is no basket here. There should be a basket for her decapitated head to fall into. So what's happening here? The chopping block also has rings on three of its four sides, possibly on four sides. Each ring has a rope that seems to hang from it. I don't know where these ropes continue. Why are there ropes attached to these rings? She is wearing a wedding ring. Her husband is not in this picture. She's about to be married to her chopping block. These ropes, are there four rings with four ropes? Will they secure her four limbs? Not for a beheading, but for another deadly treatment. Well, more elements to note. There are a few. The executioner, handsome man, standing casually by. His hand is very lightly holding the axe. He wears no boots. He's got his very nice tights on. He should have boots on, you know. It's going to get very messy. Or leather shoes. No, it looks like he's wearing slippers. So he's not worried about a mess. No chopping will happen. What is this strange object hanging from his belt? I have spoken about strange objects hanging from belts in 2 or 3 other paintings about which I've posted lectures. This looks a lot like a ballpoint pen, but this is not the time for ballpoint pens. 18th, whatever. 18, was it 1830s? What is that thing? Well, in the other paintings, I think I don't remember the titles or even the artists. I identified similar objects as, what are they called again? Oh dear, hypodermic needles. Hypodermic needles. Well, whatever. That would make more sense than a pen. What's a executioner doing carrying a pen? No, it's a hypodermic needle, some slightly ornamental one. I'm sure they have more beautiful hypodermics than we do. Those ugly metal and plastic things. And well, if that hypodermic is too small to withdraw sufficient blood from this young lady, maybe the artist already hinted at something larger in the background. There's a very sharp device here. Looks like it's part of a dagger, but it's hinting at some other treatment other than an axe. Next, Lady Jane Grey is the wrong size. She should be 17, full-grown woman. Look at the size of her head compared to the man's head. I mean, men can have larger heads, but this is not normal. He's right beside her and he's tilted and his head still looks bigger than hers. His hands too, her hands look like doll hands. A child's like she's not more than 10 years old here. The woman in the background, the back left, her face should be smaller as she's further in the background, but actually about the same size, even though she's tilted back. Her head might actually still be bigger, though in the painting. So we're dealing with a very small Lady Jane Grey. This woman, very important, is languishing. Also looks quite young. Look at her hands, grayish, greenish. She's part of the aristocracy. She's not doing well. She needs blood. Maybe they've already drained some blood out of her to make room for fresh blood. That's how it must be done. Can't just pump your body full of new blood. You have to remove the old blood, the bad blood first. That's the whole secret behind the ridiculous concept of bloodletting. You know, you don't just remove bad blood from your body, as we are told. No, you replace it with good blood. Transfusions were supposedly being done already in the 1800s, apparently in England and in continental Europe. The first experiments were done, if you believe them, with dogs and sheep. Yes, dog blood and sheep blood was transfused into humans successfully. By the way, I don't believe in blood types. I think that's an invention created to generate bureaucracy and delays and amusement for our rulers. There's another woman here, unable to look at the scene. She's in a state of anguish while the other one is languishing. Does she also need blood? Maybe. Well, I think that does it for this lovely painting. We do have some faintly visible arches in the background to remind us that we're dealing with the church. Churches were the kitchens and, I guess, adrenochrome labs of the ruling class and the slaughterhouses, as I've demonstrated with some evidence in other lectures. The word wedding is curious. Where does it originate from? Well, it doesn't have to originate from anywhere. Why can't we just make words and attach them to concepts? But no, seems like the word wedding has its root in the word weeding. Weddings were for weeding out the unnecessary, the redundant, the weak. And it turns out that the word weed, well, yes, typically refers to weeds, plants that we don't want, was once also applied to trees and even unwanted animals and small, lanky, weak persons. Runts, yes, if you know the story of Charlotte's Web, that runt. Anyway, the use of this, or this meaning for the word weed dates back to 1869. At least that's the first evidence we have of it. I suspect it was used that way at least before the painting was done. This painting. There's a Russian painting here. Let me zoom in. Let me zoom in. No, it doesn't want to zoom. There we go. And still being uncooperative. I have far too many windows open. That happens when you're a compulsive researcher, writing maniac. Winning inspiration. Okay, yeah. Vasily Pukirev, Unequal Marriage is the title. Good grief. Let me see if I can find a better copy of this. And seems like my ad blocker is not on right now. That doesn't help. And they have to, yes, that's better. So, unequal wedding, unequal marriage. Unequal marriage. Well, because it's a young woman again, being married to a rather old man. 2 candles. Well, this is Russian tradition. I hear the bride and the groom both hold a candle. Of course, it's symbolic. Um, but it's not supposed to be, they're not supposed to symbolize life, the life force, which is how I interpret it here. The young lady, the young bride, is holding this candle with just two fingers and one thumb, I assume, rather precariously. It's on an angle as if her life is now precarious. The older man has three fingers and presumably a thumb on his candle, which is standing upright. He's looking askance at his bride, slightly, as if he's a little concerned about something. On his chest, we have the emblem of a secret order, or one of those knightly orders. I think this is the Order of St. John. It has a little cross in the center, barely visible here. The sunburst around it, very common with Knights Templar and Knights of Malta. Well, that's odd to wear that during your wedding ceremony. From his neck hangs another emblem. It's not fully visible. There is a star shape, as most of these secret societies use star shapes. But there's only one secret society emblem, one secret society whose emblem commonly hangs from the neck, and that is the Order of the Golden Fleece. I don't have a good image of it here. It's very ornate, overly, of course. And from the bottom, that's supposed to be a sheep hanging limp, a sheep being, or a lamb, in either case, a symbol for sacrificial humans. Yes, and the cross I mentioned, that's not so common, only in the order of St. John. St. John, of course, also alludes to the beheading, more sacrifice. The connection between the young bride, there is a connection between this young bride and the only other woman, I believe, in this painting, an elderly woman here, peering up at, I guess, her man, or this man at least. The young woman has a wreath with flowers that have not yet blossomed, barely blossomed there, as if to suggest she's just entering puberty. Whereas this woman, her wreath, I think there's a wreath there. It's not very visible. It may have one expired blossom left. Well, the message is clear. She's hoping to receive something. She's connected with this man. This man is not marrying her seriously. Oh, this creepy priest. Yes, no one seems to be celebrating this union here. Some don't even seem interested. It's very dark, of course. They loved their dark paintings, this romantic period. And not without reason. They are painting ideas that belong in the dark, I suppose, to speak metaphorically. What else do I have to share? Oh, a Marc Chagall painting. That will be the last. Where are you? Good grief. Technology, come to the rescue. There we go. Oh, Chagall. They consider him a painter of primitive art, primitivism, or a representative of that movement, sometimes called a naive movement, I guess. Naivism? I don't know. Naive art. There's nothing naive about this art. It's naive to think it's naive. Let's zoom a little. Thank you. And it won't scroll, but that's fine. So, another bride and groom. I think this is titled The Wedding and the Eiffel Tower. Bride and groom Eiffel Tower, something like that. Well, we have got the bride dressed in lovely white again. And to her left, a white chicken. How curious. Chicken is identical in size to her. And they're squeezed together. They almost become one body. Chicken doesn't even have feet. She does, so chicken doesn't need them. They are one. And the message is, if I'm not mistaken, this bride is, this bride is meat, chicken, ready for slaughter. What a nice message. We have another sacrificial animal above. I think that's a goat. Come. Oh dear. Well, there we go. The goat. And the sun. The sun looks like a fried egg with a red yolk. The red matching the red comb of the chicken. Yes. Well, chicken eggs are really the menstrual product of fowl. And we have a one naked woman walking through the sky here. Maybe it's her menstrual product. I don't know. It's getting a bit gross. We have a upside down angel with an upside down candelabra. That does not bode well, does it? The upside down world, which I revealed to you again and again. The groom deserves some attention, to what is he doing? What on earth has he done? It looks like he's jumped onto the bride and they are all toppling. He's tackled them, the bride and the chicken. He's tackled them, attacked them. He is the hunter, I suppose. Caught them. His one arm wrapped or holding the bride. She doesn't look very happy about what's happening. Why should she? Eiffel Tower. It's here just for symbolism. I mean, that's highly stylized and not even fully portrayed. So what's the purpose? Maybe it's just a pun, linguistic pun. Eiffel, the eye fall, and they are falling. And the arch perhaps was meant to elicit churches, more arches. Yeah, there's no other sign of a church here. They should be in a church if they're marrying. Well, we've got the Eiffel Arch reminding us of churches. That will do for today. Well, thank you very much. That was interesting, to say the least. Um, I delivered these lectures mostly to, why do I? Mostly to make us fully aware of who runs this world, who creates our culture, what is beneath the images and texts we read, beneath, behind, whatever, and to have no illusions about life getting better, life being good even. Um, Life could be so much better. I am not an optimist, I am a planner. I know we can do much better than be ruled by sadistic, psychopathic cannibals. We could do a little better. All right. Be well, my friends, and see you. Speak with you. No, I'll be back with more lectures.